The little girl put her hand over the CEO's son's mouth and whispered, "Don't speak." What this poor 6-year-old discovered about the kidnapping would expose a family betrayal that shocked everyone. Before we dive into the story, drop a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. Enjoy the story. The rain hammered against the floor-to-ceiling windows of Marcus Whitmore's corner office like bullets, each drop echoing the frantic beating of his heart. At 30 years old, he had built Whitmore Industries into a billion-dollar empire, but none of that mattered now. Nothing mattered except the empty car seat in his Range Rover and the silence where his 8-year-old son Tommy's laughter should have been. "Mr. Whitmore, the police are here," his assistant Jennifer whispered from the doorway, her usually steady voice trembling. Marcus turned from the window, his designer suit wrinkled from hours of pacing. His normally perfectly styled blonde hair hung disheveled across his forehead. "Send them in," he managed, his voice barely above a whisper. Detective Rodriguez, a weathered woman in her 50s, entered with her partner. "Mr. Whitmore, we need to ask you some difficult questions about Tommy's disappearance." "He was supposed to be picked up from Westfield Academy at 3:15, Marcus said, running his hands through his hair. "The school called at 4 saying no one came for him by the time I got there." His voice broke. "They said a man in a black sedan told them he was Tommy's uncle, that there was a family emergency. Tommy went willingly." The detective scribbled notes. Who knew about the pickup routine? Marcus's mind raced. "My wife, Sarah, she's flying back from her mother's funeral in Oregon. My brother, Richard, he sometimes picks up Tommy. The school staff, our household staff." The list seemed endless, and each name felt like another knife in his chest. "We'll need a complete list," Detective Rodriguez said gently. "Mr. Whitmore, is there anyone who might want to hurt you or your family? Business rivals, disgruntled employees?" Marcus shook his head, then froze. In 6 months, the board would vote on his succession plan. If something happened to him, if he couldn't lead the company. The thought was too horrible to finish. Meanwhile, 6 miles away in the abandoned warehouse district, 6-year-old Zara Washington pressed her tiny face against a broken window, watching the world through eyes that had seen far too much for someone her age. Her brown skin was smudged with dirt, her worn pink jacket 3 sizes too big. She hadn't eaten in 2 days, and the garbage bins behind the old Hartley building were her last hope for finding something, anything, to fill the gnawing emptiness in her stomach. But as she climbed down from her hiding spot in the old fire escape, she heard voices, angry voices. "The kid's been crying for hours," a gruff voice complained. "What if someone hears?" "Nobody comes around here," another voice replied, smoother, more educated. "Besides, by tomorrow night, Marcus will be so desperate he'll sign over everything. The company, the assets, everything." Zara's heart pounded as she crept closer to the building's back door, her bare feet silent on the cold concrete. Through a crack in the boarded-up window, she could see into what used to be an office. A small boy with blonde hair sat tied to a chair, tears streaming down his face. He looked about Tommy's age, maybe 8 years old. "Uncle Richard, why are you doing this?" the boy sobbed. "Daddy's going to be so worried." "Uncle Richard!" Zara's eyes widened. The smooth-voiced man stepped into view, tall, well-dressed, with the same blonde hair as the crying boy. He knelt down in front of the child with what might have looked like kindness to anyone who couldn't see the cold calculation in his eyes. "Tommy, my boy, sometimes adults have to make difficult decisions. Your father has something that should belong to our family. To me, this is just insurance." Zara had lived on the streets long enough to recognize a predator, even one wearing an expensive suit. This man was dangerous, and that little boy was in terrible trouble. As thunder rolled across the darkening sky, Zara made a decision that would change both their lives forever. She was going to save Tommy Whitmore, even if it killed her. Ed saving, you had to save yourself. But sometimes, she thought as she watched this scared little boy, ordinary people could do extraordinary things. She waited until the guard got up to use the bathroom in the hall, his heavy footsteps echoing on the concrete floor. Then, careful as a cat burglar, she removed the grate and dropped the 8 feet to the floor below, landing in a crouch she'd perfected from months of jumping between rooftops. Racing to Tommy, she placed her small, dirty hand over his mouth before he could cry out. His eyes went wide with terror, another stranger in this nightmare, until she whispered, "Don't speak. I'm here to help you. My name is Zara." Tommy nodded frantically, tears of hope replacing tears of despair. Up close, she could see he had kind eyes, the kind of eyes that belonged to someone who had never known hunger or cold, or the feeling of being completely alone in the world. Footsteps echoed in the hallway. The guard was coming back, his boots scraping against loose concrete. "I'll get you out," Zara whispered urgently, scrambling back toward the air duct like a monkey. "I promise. Just hold on a little longer." From her hiding place above, she watched Tommy sit up straighter, a spark of hope in his eyes that hadn't been there before. He wasn't alone anymore. And for Zara, who had been alone for most of her 6 years on Earth, that feeling of being needed was better than finding food or shelter. She had a purpose now. Marcus stared at his phone, willing it to ring with news about Tommy. 48 hours had crawled by since his son's disappearance, each minute feeling like an eternity. The police had found nothing, no witnesses who remembered seeing anything suspicious, no security footage from nearby businesses, no trace of the black sedan that had swallowed his boy whole. His penthouse apartment, usually his sanctuary high above the city, now felt like a tomb. Every corner held memories of Tommy, his soccer cleats by the door, his homework scattered on the kitchen counter, his favorite stuffed elephant sitting on the couch, waiting for a hug that might never come. Sarah was still somewhere over the Midwest, flying back from her mother's funeral, delayed by the same storm system that had covered the city in an oppressive blanket of grey clouds. The silence was suffocating. Marcus had tried to work, tried to focus on quarterly reports and board presentations, but the numbers blurred together into meaningless symbols. How could profit margins matter when his whole world was missing? He'd been pacing the living room for hours, wearing a path in the Persian rug his interior designer had insisted was essential for the space. Now it just felt like another expensive thing that meant nothing without his son's laughter echoing through these rooms. When the phone finally rang at 2:47 a.m., the sound cut through the silence like a knife. Marcus lunged for it so fast he knocked over his whiskey glass, the amber liquid spreading across his mahogany desk like blood. "Marcus!" The voice was electronically distorted, processed through some kind of voice modulator that made it sound robotic and terrifying. But something about the underlying tone, the way certain syllables were emphasized, felt achingly familiar. "Where is he?" Marcus demanded, his own voice cracking with exhaustion and fear. "Is he hurt? I swear to God, if you've laid one finger on him, he's safe, for now, but that depends entirely on your cooperation." Marcus grabbed a pen with shaking hands, ready to write down bank account numbers or meeting locations. "What do you want? Money? I'll pay anything, 10 million, 20 million, just tell me." "This isn't about money, brother." The word hit Marcus like a physical blow to the chest. Brother. Even through the electronic distortion, he could hear the way Richard said that word, loaded with years of resentment and pain, dripping with a bitterness that had apparently been festering for decades. "Richard?" Marcus whispered, the name catching in his throat like a curse. "Richard, what the hell are you doing? This is Tommy we're talking about, your nephew, family. What I should have done years ago, what should have been mine from the beginning." Richard's voice was calm, controlled, but Marcus could hear the madness underneath, the careful planning that had gone into this moment. "Tomorrow morning, you're going to call an emergency board meeting. You're going to announce that you're stepping down as CEO due to personal family crisis. You're going to recommend me as your immediate successor. You're insane. The board will never accept. They will if you're convincing enough. If you explain how the stress of running $1 billion company is destroying your family, how you need to focus on being a father instead of a corporate shark, how your experienced, capable brother, who has been loyal to the company for 15 years, is the natural choice to step in during this transition. Marcus felt his world spinning out of control. Richard, please, you're talking about a child, an innocent child. He's your own blood. Blood. Richard's laugh was cold and bitter. Blood didn't matter when Dad chose you over me, did it? When he left you the company that 3 generations of Whitmores built and left me with a middle management position and a pat on the head. The phone line crackled with static, but Marcus could hear his brother's breathing, heavy and ragged. Tommy will be returned to you unharmed once the board votes and the transition is complete. Fight me on this, Marcus, and you'll never see him again. And that's a promise from your loving brother. Zara spent the next morning crouched in the doorway of a boarded-up convenience store across from the Hartley building, studying the guards' routine with the intensity of a general planning a military campaign. Living on the streets had taught her that survival depended on patterns, knowing when the police walked their beats, when the shopkeepers put out fresh garbage, when the dangerous men emerged from their holes to prey on the weak. The guard was a creature of habit. He left twice during the day, once at exactly 8 a.m. to get coffee and a breakfast sandwich from Rosa's bodega 3 blocks away, and again at noon for lunch from the same place. Each trip took him exactly 23 minutes. Zara had timed it with a broken watch she'd found in a dumpster, its cracked face still functional enough to count precious minutes. She had found a working phone in a discarded backpack 2 days ago, probably dropped by some teenager and forgotten. The screen was cracked, but it held a charge, though the battery was down to its last 12%. She would only get one chance to make a call that mattered. The morning dragged by with agonizing slowness. Zara hadn't eaten in over 36 hours, her small body running on nothing but determination and the few sips of rainwater she'd collected in a tin can. But hunger was an old companion. She'd learned to push it aside when something more important demanded her attention. At 11:58 a.m., she watched the guard lumber out of the building, his heavy footsteps echoing off the empty street. This time, she didn't bother with the air ducts. During her morning reconnaissance, she had noticed a loose board on a ground-floor window, probably damaged by vandals years ago and never repaired. 30 seconds after the guard disappeared around the corner, she was inside. The building smelled like mold and decay, with hints of something else. Fear, desperation, the lingering scent of 2 days' worth of terror. Zara followed the smell up the stairs, her bare feet silent on the concrete steps. Tommy's eyes lit up when he saw her emerge from the stairwell like a tiny guardian angel. "You came back," he whispered, his voice hoarse from crying. "I told you I would." Zara dropped to her knees beside his chair, her small fingers working frantically at the ropes binding his hands. They were thick, professional-grade restraints, tied by someone who clearly knew what they were doing. The knots were complex, designed to tighten if pulled the wrong way. "We don't have long. What's your daddy's phone number?" Tommy rattled off 10 digits, and Zara carefully entered them into the cracked phone, her small fingers trembling slightly. The phone rang once, twice, and she held her breath. "Hello? Hello, who is this?" Marcus's voice filled the small room, desperate and raw with hope and fear. "Mr. Tommy's daddy," Zara whispered, glancing nervously toward the door. "My name is Zara Washington. I found your little boy." "What? Who are you? Where's Tommy? Is he hurt?" "Please tell me he's okay." "I'm 6 years old," she said simply, as if that explained everything about how she had found him when the entire police force couldn't. "Tommy's okay, but he's tied up real tight in a big, scary building. The bad man who took him. I heard him talking. He said he's Tommy's uncle. Ed. The silence on the other end was so long, Zara thought the call had dropped. Then she heard something crash in the background, followed by what sounded like a grown man sobbing. "Uncle?" Marcus's voice was barely audible. "Did you hear his name?" "Did the man say his name?" "Richard. Tommy called him Uncle Richard." He seemed real mad about something. She heard more crashing sounds, then Marcus's voice again, stronger now, but filled with a pain that even a 6-year-old could recognize. "Oh, God! Oh, my God! Sweetheart, what did you say your name was?" "Zara Washington. I live on the streets mostly, but I'm trying to take care of myself real good." "Zara, you are the bravest, most beautiful soul I have ever encountered. Can you tell me exactly where you are right now?" Zara looked around frantically. She couldn't read very well. Street kids didn't get much schooling. But she had memorized landmarks with the precision of a navigator. The big building, with the broken eagle statue on top. "There's a Chinese restaurant across the street called Golden Dragon, but it's been closed forever. And there's a blue house with no roof next to it, and a big sign that says..." She squinted at the faded letters. "Hart something." "The old Hartley building," Marcus breathed, and she could hear him moving, probably running. "Zara, listen to me very carefully. You are in terrible danger. These men are very, very bad, and they will hurt you if they find you. You need to get away from there right now. But Tommy, I'll get help. I'll get the police and we'll come get him. But you need to hide somewhere safe until we get there. Can you do that for me?" Heavy footsteps echoed in the stairwell below. The guard was back early from lunch. "He's coming back," Zara whispered, ending the call and shoving the phone deep into her jacket pocket. She squeezed Tommy's hand, feeling how cold and small it was. "Your daddy knows where you are now. He's coming to save you." She was halfway to the loose board when the door burst open. "What the hell?" The guard's voice boomed through the room like thunder, bouncing off the concrete walls and making both children flinch. Zara froze, still 3 feet from the window where the loose board offered her only escape route. The board she had disturbed was clearly visible now, hanging at an odd angle, and muddy footprints, small ones, child-sized, led directly to where she crouched like a cornered animal. "There's someone else in here," the guard growled, pulling out a cell phone with hands the size of dinner plates. His fingers moved over the screen with surprising dexterity for such a big man. "Richard, we got ourselves a big problem." Tommy, bless his heart, tried to look confused. He shook his head dramatically, his blonde hair whipping back and forth. "I don't know what you're talking about, mister. I've been here alone the whole time." Maybe it was a rat or something. But the guard wasn't stupid, despite his brutish appearance. His small, dark eyes followed the muddy footprints across the floor with the focus of a bloodhound. These weren't rat tracks, and they certainly weren't made by Tommy's expensive school shoes, which had been clean when they'd brought him in. "Come out, kid," the guard called, his voice deceptively gentle as he moved slowly around the room. "I ain't gonna hurt you, just want to have a little chat." Zara had heard those exact words before, spoken in that same fake sweet tone by men who definitely intended to hurt her. She had learned early that adults who promised not to hurt you were usually the ones you needed to run from the fastest. But there was nowhere to run. The room was essentially a concrete box with one exit, and he was standing in front of it. She bolted anyway, small and quick as lightning, but the guard was quicker than his bulk suggested. His massive hand closed around her upper arm like a vice, lifting her completely off the ground as if she weighed no more than a bag of groceries. "Well, well, well, what do we have here?" He held her up to eye level, studying her face with the cold calculation of someone appraising livestock. He took in her dark brown skin, her ragged clothes that were 3 sizes too big, her too thin frame that spoke of too many missed meals. "You're one of them street kids, ain't you? Been living rough?" Zara didn't answer. She'd learned long ago that silence was often the safest response when adults started asking questions. Adults who meant well usually didn't grab children by the arms and lift them off the ground. The guard's phone buzzed with an incoming call. Richard's voice filled the room, tinny and distorted through the speaker. "What kind of problem, Dale? I thought I made it clear that nothing could go wrong. We got ourselves a little spy, boss. Street kid, maybe 6 or 7 years old, been sneaking around, probably listening to everything. Looks like she's been talking to the boy, too." There was a long pause on the other end of the line, filled only with static and the sound of Richard's breathing. When he spoke again, his voice was cold as winter steel. "Has she called anyone? Does she have a phone?" Dale's free hand patted down Zara's jacket with professional efficiency. The broken phone felt like a lead weight in her pocket, but somehow he missed it in his haste. "Don't see one on her. But that don't mean she didn't already make contact with someone. Bring her to me now, along with my nephew." "What about keeping them separated? Thought you said plans have changed." Richard's voice had taken on a dangerous edge that made even Dale straighten up. "The timeline has accelerated. Bring them both to the warehouse on Pier 47. We're moving to Phase 2. "You got it, boss." Dale ended the call and grabbed Tommy's chair, starting to drag it toward the door, with Tommy still tied to it. The chair legs scraped against the concrete floor with a sound like fingernails on a chalkboard. "Come on, princess," he said to Zara, his grip still tight on her arm. "Time to meet the real boss. And let me tell you something, he ain't nearly as nice as me." As they were forced from the building, Zara caught sight of the golden dragon painted on the restaurant window across the street. Its bright colors faded, but still visible. She had told Tommy's daddy about that dragon. Maybe, just maybe, that would be enough to help him find them. But as Dale shoved them both into a windowless van that smelled of cigarettes and fear, Zara realized with a sinking heart that her attempt to save Tommy might have cost them both their lives. The van's engine roared to life, taking them away from the Hartley building toward an uncertain fate. And somewhere across the city, she could only hope that Tommy's daddy was racing against time to find them before Uncle Richard decided they had outlived their usefulness. Marcus arrived at the Hartley building with Detective Rodriguez and 3 patrol cars, their sirens cutting through the afternoon air like knives through silk. The sound echoed off the abandoned buildings, creating a symphony of urgency that matched the frantic beating of his heart. But even before they kicked in the door, with a resounding crash that sent splinters flying, Marcus knew in his gut they were too late. The building was empty, filled only with the echo of their footsteps and the weight of his worst fears. Dust motes danced in the afternoon sunlight that streamed through gaps in the boarded windows, and the air smelled of abandonment and desperation. "Over here," Detective Rodriguez called from the 3rd floor, her voice carrying down the empty stairwell. "We've got rope, children's footprints, clear signs of a struggle." Marcus took the stairs 3 at a time, his heart hammering against his ribs. The scene in the former office told a story that made his blood run cold. A folding chair sat in the center of the room, surrounded by coils of cut rope. Small, muddy footprints, 2 different sizes, marked the concrete floor like breadcrumbs leading nowhere. But it was the small piece of fabric caught on a splinter of wood that nearly broke him. Pink cotton, worn thin from too many washings, the kind of cheap material found in children's clothing from discount stores. It didn't belong to Tommy, whose wardrobe was filled with designer labels and organic cotton. This had to be from the little girl, Zara, the brave 6-year-old who had risked everything to help his son. His phone rang with the now familiar electronic buzz that had haunted his nightmares for the past 48 hours. Richard again, but this time Marcus could hear something different in the background. Traffic, car horns, the sound of movement. "You brought the police." Richard's voice was cold with fury, the electronic distortion making him sound even more inhuman. I specifically, explicitly told you not to involve law enforcement. Richard, please. Marcus pressed the phone to his ear with one hand while clutching the pink fabric with the other. Let them go. They're just children. Innocent children who have nothing to do with whatever is eating you alive inside. The boy is my nephew, my own blood, but the little street rat. She's a complication I didn't plan for, a variable that threatens everything I've worked toward. Complications need to be resolved. Marcus felt his blood turn to ice water in his veins. What are you saying? Richard, what the hell are you saying? I'm saying you have exactly 90 minutes to call off every police officer in this city and agree to my original terms, or both children disappear forever. And Marcus, I know you think you understand what this is really about, but you have no idea what Dad really did to our family. What are you talking about? Dad loved us both. He was proud of both his sons. Dad loved you. I was just the spare, the backup plan, the insurance policy in case something happened to his precious golden boy. Richard's voice cracked slightly, years of buried pain bleeding through the electronic mask. Do you know what it's like, Marcus, to watch your own father look at you like you're a disappointment from the day you draw your first breath? To know that no matter what you accomplish, no matter how hard you try, you'll never be good enough? Marcus was quiet, his memory painting a different picture of their childhood. He remembered Richard as the charmer, the one with the easy smile who could make their father laugh until tears streamed down his face. Marcus had been the shy one, awkward and bookish, struggling under the weight of being the eldest son and heir apparent. You remember it wrong, Richard continued, his voice growing stronger and more bitter with each word. You remember what you wanted to see, what was comfortable for you to believe. But I remember the truth. I remember Dad pulling me aside when I was 12 and telling me that my job was to support you, to be your right hand, to help you succeed. Never to lead, always to follow. The line crackled with static, but Marcus could hear his brother's labored breathing, the sound of a man coming apart at the seams. And when Dad got sick with the cancer, Richard's voice dropped to barely above a whisper, when he was lying in that hospital bed, pumped full of morphine and fading away, he called for you. Even though I was the one who sat with him every night for 3 months, even though I was the one who held his hand when the pain got too bad, even though I was the one who was actually there, he spent his last conscious moments asking where you were. Marcus closed his eyes, remembering those final weeks. He had been in Japan, negotiating a merger that would secure the company's future. Richard had insisted he go, had promised to handle everything at home. His last words were about how proud he was of his son. Singular Marcus, never sons, always son. And when I reminded him that he had 2 sons, you know what he said. Richard's laugh was broken glass. He said, of course, but Marcus is the one who matters. He's the future. Richard, I didn't know. I swear to God I had no idea. Of course you didn't know. You were too busy being perfect, too busy living up to expectations, too busy being everything he wanted in a son to notice that your brother was dying inside. Richard's voice hardened again, the vulnerability replaced by cold steel. 90 minutes, Marcus. Call off the investigation, agree to step down, and maybe I'll let you experience what it feels like to be the beloved son instead of the disposable one. And if I don't, then you'll know exactly what I've lived with my entire life. The loss of everything that matters, the knowledge that you failed when it counted most. The only difference is, you'll know exactly whose fault it is. The line went dead, leaving Marcus staring at a piece of pink fabric and realizing that sometimes the people we love most are the ones most capable of destroying us completely. And somewhere in this vast, unforgiving city, 2 innocent children were paying the price for a wound that had been festering in his family for 30 years. Detective Rodriguez put her hand on his shoulder, her touch gentle but firm. We'll find them, Mr. Whitmore. We'll bring them both home safe. But as Marcus looked out at the sprawling urban landscape where two small children had vanished like drops of water in an ocean, he wondered if love and determination would be enough to overcome a lifetime of carefully nurtured hate. The clock was ticking, and somewhere out there, his brother was planning something that would change all their lives forever. The warehouse on Pier 47 squatted like a concrete beast at the edge of the harbour, its broken windows staring out at the grey water like dead eyes. The smell of salt, rust and decades of decay hung in the air like a physical presence. Zara and Tommy huddled together in the back of the van as Dale parked behind a stack of shipping containers that blocked them from view of the main road. "Out!" Dale grunted, hauling them from the vehicle with the same care he might show loading cargo. Tommy stumbled, his legs weak from being tied to a chair for 2 days, but Zara caught his arm and helped steady him. Even in their terror, they had become a team. The interior of the warehouse was a maze of abandoned machinery and empty crates, lit by harsh fluorescent lights that flickered and buzzed like dying insects. In the center of this industrial graveyard, Richard Whitmore stood waiting, and seeing him up close, Zara understood why Tommy had trusted him initially. He looked like a successful businessman in his tailored suit and polished shoes, nothing like the monsters she had learned to fear on the streets. But Zara had survived 6 years by reading people's eyes, and Richard's eyes were wrong. They held the same cold calculation she had seen in the worst predators, men who saw other people as objects to be used and discarded. "Uncle Richard," Tommy whispered, his voice breaking with confusion and hurt, "why are you doing this to me, to Daddy?" "I thought you loved us." Richard's expression softened for just a moment, and Zara saw something flicker across his face that might have been genuine pain. "I do love you, Tommy. You're my nephew, my brother's boy. This isn't about you." "Then let me go home," Tommy pleaded, tears streaming down his dirt-stained cheeks. "Please, I promise I won't tell anyone. I'll say I ran away or got lost, or—" "I can't do that, son." Richard's voice was gentle, almost paternal, which somehow made it more frightening than if he had been shouting. "Your father needs to learn some very important lessons about family loyalty and respect. Sometimes the people we love have to suffer for the sins of others." He turned his attention to Zara, studying her with the intense focus of a scientist examining a specimen. "And you, little girl, you've caused me considerable trouble. Do you understand that?" Zara lifted her chin defiantly, channeling every ounce of street-hardened courage she possessed. "I know you're a bad man who hurts children. That makes you the worst kind of person in the whole world." Richard laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Bad man, sweet child, I'm trying to reclaim what was stolen from me. What should have been mine by right of birth and blood. Your interference has complicated a very delicate operation." "My daddy is coming for me," Tommy said suddenly, his voice stronger than it had been since the ordeal began. "And he's bringing the police." "You can't win, Uncle Richard. Good guys always beat bad guys in the end." "Your daddy," Richard said, pulling out his phone, "is about to make the most important decision of his life. Let's see if blood really is thicker than water." The phone rang once before Marcus's desperate voice filled the warehouse. "Richard, is that you? Are the children safe?" "Hello, brother." "Yes, both children are here with me, perfectly safe for the moment. I trust you've had time to consider my proposal." Zara could hear the anguish in Marcus's voice even through the tiny speaker. "The board meeting is in 2 hours. I'll do what you want, Richard. I'll step down and recommend you as my successor. Just please let them go." "I'm afraid it's not quite that simple anymore," Richard said, beginning to pace around the children like a shark circling prey. "You see, our young street friend here has created some complications. She's seen too much, heard too much. She's what we call a loose end." "She's 6 years old!" Marcus's voice cracked with horror. "Richard, for God's sake, she's just a baby. She's a witness who could destroy everything I've worked for, but I'm a reasonable man, Marcus. I'm prepared to offer you a choice." The warehouse fell silent, except for the distant sound of waves lapping against the pier and the electric hum of the overhead lights. Zara felt Tommy grab her hand, his small fingers intertwining with hers. "What kind of choice?" Marcus asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Richard smiled, and it was the most terrifying expression Zara had ever seen. "You can save one of them. Your son. The heir to the Whitmore legacy, the continuation of our family line. Or you can save this nameless street child who means nothing to anyone, but you can't save both." The silence that followed was deafening. Through the phone, they could hear Marcus sobbing, the sound of a man's soul being torn apart. "You bastard," Marcus whispered. "You sick, twisted bastard. They're both innocent. They're both children. Choose, brother. You have 60 seconds to decide which child lives and which one disappears forever. And Marcus, remember that every second you hesitate is a second closer to losing them both." "Daddy, don't listen to him," Tommy called out, his voice echoing in the vast warehouse space. "Save Zara. She tried to save me first." Zara squeezed his hand tighter, amazed at the courage this little boy was showing in the face of unimaginable terror. She had seen grown men break under less pressure than Tommy was enduring. 50 seconds, Marcus," Richard said calmly, checking his expensive watch with the casual air of someone timing a business meeting rather than orchestrating a nightmare. "I must say, I'm curious to see what choice you'll make. Will you save your own flesh and blood, or will guilt over this street waif cloud your judgment?" Through the phone's speaker they could hear Marcus moving, probably pacing his office or apartment, his breathing ragged with panic and desperation. "There has to be another way, Richard. Take me instead. Take everything, the company, the money, all of it. Just let them both go." "Doom, 30 seconds, Richard continued, unmoved by his brother's plea. "You know, this reminds me of one of Dad's old moral dilemmas. Remember how he used to pose hypothetical questions at dinner? If you could save either a drowning stranger or your family dog, which would you choose? He always said those questions revealed a person's true character. This isn't a hypothetical," Marcus screamed through the phone, his composed CEO facade completely shattered. "These are real children with real lives." Dale shifted uncomfortably beside the children, his massive frame casting long shadows in the flickering light. Even he seemed disturbed by the psychological torture Richard was inflicting on his own brother. 20 seconds, Marcus. I need an answer." Zara looked up at Tommy, seeing her own fear reflected in his blue eyes, but also something else, a determination that reminded her of the older kids she had known on the streets, the ones who had learned to face impossible situations with whatever courage they could muster. 10 seconds, brother dear. "Wait!" Marcus's voice cut through the warehouse like a gunshot. I choose! I choose!" The silence stretched like a taut wire about to snap. "I choose to call your bluff." Richard's smile faltered for the first time since they had arrived at the warehouse. "Excuse me? You heard me. I'm calling your bluff, Richard. You're not going to kill 2 innocent children. You're angry, you're hurt, you feel cheated and ignored and undervalued. I get all of that. But you're not a murderer. You're my brother." Richard's face darkened, his carefully maintained composure beginning to crack. "You always were too confident, Marcus. Always so sure you could predict everyone else's behavior." "Prove me wrong, then," Marcus said, his voice growing stronger. "Go ahead, Richard. Show me what 30 years of resentment has really turned you into. But know this, if you hurt either of those children, I will spend every remaining day of my life making sure you pay for it." "You sanctimonious bastard," Richard snarled, the electronic distortion unable to hide the raw fury in his voice. "You think you know me so well? You think you can manipulate me with psychology and guilt?" He walked over to where the children sat, huddled together, and grabbed Zara by her thin shoulders, hauling her to her feet. Her worn sneakers scraped against the concrete floor as she struggled to maintain her balance. "Let's test your theory, shall we?" Richard pulled a knife from his jacket, a wicked-looking blade that gleamed under the harsh lights. "Last chance, Marcus. Choose, or I choose for you." But before anyone could react, Zara did something that surprised everyone in that warehouse, including herself. She bit down hard on Richard's hand that held her shoulder, her small teeth finding the soft flesh between his thumb and forefinger. Richard yelped and released her, more from shock than pain. "Run, Tommy!" Zara shouted, grabbing the boy's hand and pulling him toward what looked like a fire exit at the far end of the warehouse. "Run!" Their footsteps echoed like gunshots as they raced between the towering stacks of empty crates and abandoned machinery. Behind them, Richard was shouting orders at Dale, his voice no longer calm and controlled, but filled with rage. "Don't let them reach that door. If they get outside, they could flag down help." Tommy was faster than Zara expected, his longer legs eating up the distance despite his exhaustion and fear. They dodged around a forklift, leaped over a stack of wooden pallets, and kept running toward what they hoped was freedom. But the warehouse was bigger than it looked, and Dale was surprisingly quick for such a large man. The sound of his heavy boots pounding against the concrete grew closer with each passing second. 20 feet from the exit, Zara realized they weren't going to make it. Dale's shadow was already falling across them, his massive frame blocking out the light from overhead. In desperation, she did the only thing she could think of. She pushed Tommy toward the door while throwing herself sideways into a gap between two shipping containers. "Keep going!" she screamed. "Get help!" Tommy hesitated for just a moment, torn between escape and loyalty to the girl who had risked everything to save him. But Zara's sacrifice had given him the seconds he needed. He burst through the fire exit into the grey afternoon light, his voice carrying across the pier, "Help! Somebody help us!" Inside the warehouse, Richard's carefully laid plans began to crumble like a house of cards in a hurricane. Tommy's cry for help echoed across Pier 47 like a prayer answered. A maintenance worker repairing a nearby crane looked up in shock, while a security guard making his rounds froze in disbelief at the sight of a small boy bursting from what was supposed to be an empty warehouse. "Call 911!" Tommy screamed, his voice hoarse but carrying clearly in the harbor air. "There's a bad man in there with a knife." "He's got another kid." The security guard, a retired police officer named Frank Molinari, didn't hesitate. He was already reaching for his radio while running toward Tommy, his hand instinctively moving to the pepper spray on his belt. "Kid, slow down. Are you hurt?" Frank caught Tommy as the boy nearly collapsed from exhaustion and terror. "What's your name, son?" "Tommy Whitmore," the boy gasped, clinging to Frank's uniform shirt like a lifeline. "My daddy's name is Marcus Whitmore. Uncle Richard took me, and there's a little girl still inside, and he's got a knife and—" "Whoa! Easy there!" Frank was already calling for backup, while simultaneously trying to calm the traumatized child. "Harbor Patrol, this is Frank at Pier 47. I've got a situation here. Possible kidnapping, child in immediate danger, requesting immediate police and paramedic response." Inside the warehouse, Richard's face had gone pale with rage as the sound of Tommy's cries penetrated the thick walls. "You idiots! How did you let an 8-year-old boy get away?" Dale was already moving toward the fire exit, but Richard grabbed his arm. "No, it's too late. If you go out there now, you'll be seen. We need to get out of here before the police arrive." "What about the girl?" Dale asked, nodding toward the shipping containers where Zara had disappeared. Zara pressed herself deeper into the narrow space between the metal walls, her heart pounding so loud she was sure they could hear it. The gap was barely wide enough for her small frame, but it provided the only cover available in the warehouse's open floor plan. Richard was quiet for a long moment, and when he spoke, his voice had returned to that terrifying calm. "Bring her. She's coming with us. Boss, That's going to make things a lot more complicated. I said bring her. Richard snapped. She's the only leverage we have left now that my nephew has escaped, and she's the only witness who can tie us to this location. Zara heard their footsteps approaching, Dale's heavy boots and Richard's expensive dress shoes creating a rhythm like a death march on the concrete floor. She tried to make herself smaller, pressing against the cold metal wall and holding her breath. "Come out, little girl," Richard called, his voice echoing between the containers. "There's nowhere to run now. Make this easy on yourself." But Zara had spent years playing hide-and-seek with dangers far worse than Richard Whitmore. She had learned patience from necessity, the ability to remain perfectly still even when every instinct screamed at her to run. She knew they would find her eventually. The space was too small, and there were too few places to hide. But every second she delayed was another second for Tommy to get further away, another second for help to arrive. "I don't have time for games," Richard said, his voice growing closer. "Dale, start checking every gap, every hiding spot. She's just a child. She can't have gone far." The sound of metal scraping against metal filled the warehouse as Dale began systematically moving crates and containers. Zara could hear him working his way toward her hiding spot, his progress methodical and inexorable. Outside, the first police sirens were beginning to wail in the distance, still blocks away, but getting closer. Frank had Tommy wrapped in his security jacket, both of them crouched behind his patrol car as they waited for backup. "You did good, kid," Frank said quietly. "Real good. That little girl in there, she's your friend." Tommy nodded, tears streaming down his face. "Her name is Zara. She saved me. She's only 6 years old, and she saved me from the bad men." "Well, now it's our turn to save her," Frank said, checking his radio for updates. "Police are 2 minutes out. Everything's going to be okay." But inside the warehouse, Zara's luck was running out. Dale's massive hand appeared at the mouth of her hiding place, followed by his ugly, bearded face. "Found her," he called over his shoulder. Richard appeared beside him, his expression unreadable. "Hello again, little hero." "Time to go." As Dale's hand closed around her arm and pulled her from her hiding place, Zara could hear the police sirens getting closer. But would they arrive in time to stop Richard from disappearing with her into the maze of warehouses and shipping containers that made up the harbor district? Tommy was safe. That had to be enough, even if it meant she wouldn't be. But as they dragged her toward a service entrance at the rear of the warehouse, Zara began to realize that her ordeal was far from over. Richard Whitmore was not a man who accepted defeat gracefully, and she was about to become his final, desperate gambit in a game that had already cost too much. The sound of car engines and shouting voices filled the air outside as law enforcement surrounded the pier. But Richard had been planning this for months, and he had contingencies that nobody could have anticipated. "Move," he whispered, pressing the knife against Zara's back, as they slipped out into the maze of industrial equipment behind the warehouse. "We're going to take a little trip, you and I. And this time, there won't be any heroes coming to save you. Istance, we have a child hostage." As they raced around the warehouse in pursuit, Marcus's phone rang. Richard again, but this time the electronic distortion was gone. His brother's voice was raw, unfiltered, and filled with a desperation that Marcus had never heard before. "Hello, Marcus. I assume you're here by now. Richard, listen to me. You need to let her go. She's just a child. She has nothing to do with this." "Nothing to do with this?" Richard's laugh was bitter and broken. "She has everything to do with this, brother. She's the reason my perfect plan fell apart. She's the reason your precious son escaped to tell the world what Uncle Richard is really like." They were moving through the container maze now, following the SWAT team that had taken point. Marcus could hear Richard's breathing through the phone, could hear the sound of footsteps on metal, probably climbing on top of a shipping container. "Where are you going, Richard? There's nowhere to run. The entire pier is surrounded." "I'm not running, Marcus. I'm making a point." They rounded a corner and found themselves in a small clearing between four towering stacks of containers. Above them, silhouetted against the grey sky, Richard stood on top of a container with Zara held tightly against his chest. The little girl looked impossibly small in his arms, her legs dangling in the air. "Let her go!" Marcus shouted, his voice echoing off the metal walls around them. "This is between you and me, Richard. She doesn't deserve this." "Deserve?" Richard's voice carried clearly from his elevated position. "You want to talk about what people deserve? Let me tell you what I deserved, brother." SWAT snipers were already taking positions, but Marcus could see the problem immediately. Richard was holding Zara in front of him like a human shield, and any shot that missed would potentially hit the child. "I deserved a father who looked at me with pride instead of disappointment," Richard continued, his voice growing stronger and more unhinged with each word. "I deserved to inherit the company that 3 generations of Whitmores built, not to be pushed aside for the golden boy who couldn't even be bothered to stay in the country when Dad was dying. Richard, please, I deserve to hear 'I'm proud of you' instead of 'why can't you be more like your brother?'" Richard's voice cracked. "Do you know what it's like, Marcus, to spend 37 years knowing that your own father considered you a failure? A consolation prize?" From her position in Richard's arms, Zara's small voice carried down to them. "Let me go, mister. You're hurting me." "I'm hurting you." Richard looked down at her with something that might have been genuine surprise. "Little girl, I've been hurt every single day of my life. Your pain is nothing compared to mine." "That's not my fault," Zara said with the simple logic of childhood. "I didn't do anything to you. Tommy didn't do anything to you. Why are you being so mean?" The question seemed to stop Richard cold. For a long moment, he just stared down at the small child in his arms, and Marcus saw something flicker across his brother's face. Confusion, possibly even a glimmer of shame. "It's not about what you did," Richard said quietly. "It's about what was taken from me, what should have been mine." "But that's still not my fault," Zara insisted. "My mama always said that when people are mean to you, it's because they're hurt inside. But being hurt don't give you the right to hurt other people." Detective Rodriguez was making hand signals to the SWAT team, but Marcus shook his head. Something was happening up there, something that bullets and tactical precision couldn't solve. "Your mama was wrong, little girl," Richard said, but his voice had lost some of its edge. "Sometimes hurting people is the only way to make them understand what you've been through." "No," Zara said firmly, "my mama was right. She said the meanest people are just the saddest people wearing angry masks, and she said that everyone deserves love, even the scary people." For the first time since this nightmare began, Richard Whitmore fell silent. And in that silence, Marcus finally understood that his brother's rage had been hiding something much deeper and more painful than mere jealousy. It had been hiding a lifetime of feeling unloved. "Richard," Marcus called up to his brother, his voice gentle now instead of desperate. "Put her down, please, let's just talk." "Talk?" Richard's laugh was hollow, but the manic edge had gone out of it. 30 years too late for talking, don't you think?" "It's never too late," Marcus said, slowly walking closer to the base of the shipping container. The SWAT team tensed, but Detective Rodriguez held up a hand to keep them in position. "I never knew, Richard. I swear to God, I never knew that Dad made you feel that way. Of course you didn't know. You were too busy being perfect to notice anyone else's pain." Zara was still held against Richard's chest, but Marcus could see that his brother's grip had loosened slightly. The little girl was no longer struggling, instead looking down at Marcus with those wise, ancient eyes that seemed far too old for a 6-year-old's face. "I wasn't perfect," Marcus said, his voice carrying clearly in the harbour air. I was terrified. Every single day, I was terrified that I would disappoint him, that I would prove I wasn't worthy of the trust he placed in me. Do you know how many nights I lay awake wishing I could be more like you? Richard's head snapped up, his eyes meeting Marcus's for the first time since this confrontation began. What? You were everything I wasn't, Richard. Confident, charming, easy with people. Dad used to light up when you walked into a room. He never lit up like that for me. I had to earn every moment of his approval through perfect grades and flawless behavior. That's not true, Richard said, but his voice lacked conviction. It is true. You remember what you needed to remember, just like I did, but I remember something else. I remember Dad at your high school graduation, telling everyone who would listen that his younger son was going to be somebody special. I remember him bragging to his business partners about your charm and people skills. I remember being jealous of how easily you made him laugh. Tears were streaming down Richard's face now, cutting tracks through the dust and grime of their ordeal. He never told me he was proud of me. Not once. He told me, Marcus said softly. Every time you weren't around, he would talk about how proud he was of both his sons. How I had the business sense to run the company, but you had the heart to make it mean something. He said we were two halves of the same whole, that together we would build something greater than either of us could manage alone. You're lying, Richard whispered, but there was no conviction in it. I'm not lying. I have letters, Richard. Letters he wrote to his lawyer, instructions about how the company should be structured to take advantage of both our strengths. He didn't just want you to work for me, he wanted us to be partners. True partners. Marcus pulled out his phone, his hands shaking as he scrolled through his email. I found them when we were settling his estate. I never showed them to you because I was selfish. I was afraid that sharing power would diminish me somehow. The sound of Marcus's voice reading their father's words carried across the pier like a prayer. Richard has the emotional intelligence and people skills that Marcus lacks. Marcus has the analytical mind and strategic vision that Richard lacks. The company will only reach its full potential when they learn to work together as the team I always envisioned them to be. Richard's shoulders began to shake, and for a moment, Marcus thought his brother might collapse right there on top of the shipping container. But Zara's small voice cut through the emotional maelstrom. See, your daddy loved you too. He just didn't know how to say it good. Let me down, mister, Zara said gently. Please, I promise I won't run away. I just want to help you and Mr. Tommy's daddy fix whatever got broken. And for a long moment, Richard stared down at this tiny girl who had somehow managed to see through his rage to the hurt child underneath. Then, slowly, carefully, he set her down on the metal surface of the container. There's a ladder at the back, he called down to the police below. She can climb down safely. Detective Rodriguez nodded to one of her officers, who quickly moved to help Zara descend. But the little girl paused at the top of the ladder, looking back at Richard with eyes full of compassion that no 6-year-old should have needed to develop. I'm sorry your daddy didn't hug you enough, she said simply. But that don't mean nobody will ever love you. People can learn to love better if you give them a chance. Then she was climbing down the ladder, moving with the practiced ease of a child who had been navigating dangerous heights for most of her short life. The moment her feet touched the ground, she was surrounded by paramedics and police officers, but her eyes remained fixed on the two brothers, still separated by 30 feet of vertical space and 30 years of misunderstanding. Richard, Marcus called up. Come down, please. Let's fix this together the way Dad always wanted us to. For the first time in 3 decades, Richard Whitmore looked at his older brother without hatred in his eyes. Instead, Marcus saw exhaustion, pain, and maybe, just maybe, the faintest glimmer of hope. The knife fell first, clattering off the side of the container to land harmlessly on the asphalt below. Then Richard himself began the long climb down, each rung of the ladder taking him closer to either redemption or justice. But for the first time since this nightmare began, Marcus thought there might actually be a difference between the two. 6 months later, Zara Washington stood in front of the floor-to-ceiling windows of Marcus Whitmore's penthouse, watching the city spread out below like a glittering carpet. She wore a new blue dress that actually fit, her clean hair braided with matching ribbons. But the biggest change was in her eyes, no longer holding the wariness of a child expecting the world to hurt her. "Zara, sweetie, dinner's ready," Sarah Whitmore called from the kitchen. Marcus's wife had returned from Oregon a changed woman, with fierce appreciation for every ordinary moment with her family. Tommy burst through the door like a small hurricane, his backpack hitting the floor as he raced towards Zara. At 8, he had recovered with childhood's remarkable resilience, though he still checked that doors were locked before bed. "Zara! Mrs. Henderson said I can read my hero essay to the whole assembly." "Now that's wonderful, Tommy," Zara said, her voice carrying warmth impossible 6 months ago. "You going to tell them how brave you were?" "I'm going to tell them about you, about how the real hero was a little girl braver than anybody in the world." From the doorway, Marcus watched with joy and heartbreak. The adoption had taken months of paperwork and court appearances, but Zara's mother had died 2 years ago, and she'd been living on streets since aging out of foster care. "Uncle Richard called," Marcus announced, holding his phone. "He wanted to talk to both of you." Richard's name no longer brought fear to this household. He was serving 18 months in minimum security, followed by probation and counseling. But more importantly, he'd used prison time to confront the demons that drove him to desperation. "Can we video call him?" Zara asked. She'd developed an unexpected relationship with Richard. Her childlike ability to see past anger, to hurt, underneath becoming foundation for his recovery. Richard's face appeared on screen. Prison had aged him, but there was peace in his eyes that hadn't existed during years of resentment. "Hello, little guardian angel. How was school?" "Good. I got an A on my math test." Zara held up her paper proudly. "I'm so proud of you both." Richard's voice caught with emotion. "Tommy, I hope you can remember that Uncle Richard learned to be better." "I forgave you already," Tommy said with childhood wisdom. "Daddy explained how grown-ups get feelings mixed up and do dumb things." "But you said sorry." Marcus cleared his throat. "Richard, I have news. The board voted yesterday. They approved restructuring. When you get out, you'll return as Chief Operating Officer and equal partner. 50-50 ownership, like Dad always intended." Richard sobbed quietly. For 37 years, he'd believed himself unloved. Learning his father planned him as equal partner shattered the resentment foundation of his adult life. "I don't deserve this. Not after what I put everyone through." "We all deserve love," Zara said, repeating her mother's words. "Even when we make mistakes, especially then." Sarah appeared, wiping her hands on a towel. "Richard, when you get out, we want you in the guest house behind our property. The kids need their uncle, and Marcus needs his brother back." "Both kids?" Richard asked, looking at Zara. "Both kids," Sarah confirmed. "Zara is our daughter now, legally and every way that matters." She asked if Uncle Richard could teach her chess. Zara nodded enthusiastically. "Tommy said you used to beat his daddy when you were little. I want to learn to beat both of you." Richard's laugh was genuine and joyful. "It's a deal, little sister." As they gathered for dinner, Marcus looked at his transformed family. Sarah, who'd learned not to take love for granted, Tommy, who'd discovered courage, and Zara, who'd saved them all by believing everyone deserved love. The empty chair where Richard should sit wouldn't be empty forever. In 12 months, he'd come home to a family that learned to heal together, forgive completely, and love without conditions. Outside, city lights twinkled like stars, each representing a life, a story, a chance for redemption. Somewhere in those lights, other broken families were finding their way back to each other. The Whitmores were complete at last, not despite their scars, but because of them. They'd learned the strongest families aren't ones that never break, they're ones that find ways to heal together. Sometimes, Marcus thought, watching Zara help Tommy with homework, while Sarah hummed in the kitchen, the most beautiful families are the ones you choose to build from pieces of your broken heart.